Hello and welcome back to a very festive Archaeosoup Towers. Oh, and also welcome to our first ever Bona Fide book review. We've been wanting to bring book reviews to Archaeosoup for a little while now, and it's really been about trying to find a mechanism that would work, both for us and also for you, the viewer. And I'm happy to say that we're starting to crack that nut. And the first book that we're going to be reviewing is Inside the Egyptian Museum with Zahi Hawass, Part 1. Now, first of all, let me just say thank you so much to our friends over at Past Preservers for providing the review copy of this book. They sent us over a code so that we could have a good look at the book and basically bring you guys this review. So thank you so much to Past Preservers. But I would really like to underline from the outset, because there's been a bit of controversy on YouTube recently, that this is not a paid review. Sometimes YouTubers apparently are paid to review things and therefore give it a favourable review, more favourable than otherwise they might do. And in this instance, this is certainly not the case. This is my honest opinion, but the book was in fact provided by Past Preservers. So thanks to them, but the opinion is pure Mr. Soup. Now, as already stated, the title of this book is Inside the Egyptian Museum with Zahi Hawass, Part 1. Part 1 of 4, in fact, which will be coming out in the course of the coming year. It is published by Laboratorio Rosso, and its language is English. It costs $2.99 on the iOS bookstore and £1.99 if you're in the UK, and is also available on Android. The Egyptian Museum is one of those places which is on many people's to-do lists. It's a museum which if you love museums, or if you just like travelling, usually you want to try and get to. And I would certainly love to have a chance to go there at some point in my life. As the author of the foreword, Sandro Vanini, a photographer who spent his life photographing historic sites and monuments, says, this museum is one of those sort of old school places where there's a slight sense of things being shoved into rooms and you being left to explore them. Your hand isn't held quite so much as it is in other museums, and therefore it has this wonderful, slightly old school sense of discovery to it. Of course, the museum has undergone very turbulent times in its recent history, with the revolution in Egypt and also vandalism, even, for example, looting at the worst points in its history. But the museum is rightly famous, and therefore is something which I am very interested in. Despite that, though, as I've already said previously, Egyptology for me is one of those specialisms within archaeology, which I always want to try and keep, I suppose, slightly, not so much arm's length, but slightly off to one side. I know so much about other periods of history in other parts of the world that it's a bit of a chocolate box, a bit of a pleasurable experience to look at Egypt and its sites and monuments and movies like The Mummy with a sense of joy and glee. And therefore, I've never really wanted to delve too much into Egyptology, because I wouldn't want to be that guy sitting, as I do, for example, when I watch, say, Troy, sitting watching The Mummy going, oh, we would never do that. So I've always wanted to walk this line with ancient Egypt, of being informed, but not being, I suppose, academically critical of everything I see. And I'm really pleased to be able to say that this book also actually walks that line. It is a pleasure to read, but won't, I suppose, drag you down with the specifics and the minutiae of what is in the museum. Now, the book is certainly best viewed in landscape format. This may be a problem for you night owls who like to read with your e-reader in portrait mode, but it does show off the format of the photos, and also actually navigation is so much easier when the iPad or the device that you're using is in landscape mode. It's 109 pages split into 8 chapters, and they include, for example, the introduction, which has in it also a useful chronology, Zahi's favourite objects, a chapter for each of the periods of time represented by the artefacts covered in the book, a list of objects, a bibliography, and also more about the authors. The author of the book is, of course, Zahi Hawass, an Egyptologist, archaeologist, and also former Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs in Egypt. He is famous, and some people would say infamous, in the world of archaeology. But he is undeniably an intriguing character, and this is one of the most pleasurable things about this book, is the fact that it is written as a tour. At times, especially for example in the chapter about Zahi's favourite objects, you get the sense of being on a walk through the museum with the man himself. There's a warmth in terms of the almost anecdotal quality to the descriptions of some of the artifacts and some stories attached to them. You have a real sense that you are in fact wandering around with someone on a tour which few people would ever get to have in real life. Underlining this sense of passing through the museum is the map which appears in the top of the page. You can tap this map and it'll not only show you where you are on the trail, but also actually give you, in some cases, a photo of your point in the museum. So you get a bit of a sense of being on this sort of virtual tour with Zahi. The text successfully walks a line between being a friendly and warm tour through the museum and being a comprehensive overview. Artifacts are described and dated in a way which is going to satisfy any hardcore academics out there, but also as well successfully manages to avoid being, I suppose, dry. The text is alive, and never did I feel as though I was walking through, for example, the verbal equivalent of treacle. I wasn't struggling to read this text, and therefore I was learning and enjoying myself. One of the advantages of this format in terms of presentation, the ebook, is that most of the pictures are in fact not single pictures. They are galleries. In the foreword, in the description of the artifacts, you can swipe usually the picture off the screen and another one will take its place. This adds a depth to the information which is being presented, and again keeps it buoyant. Make sure that you're not just being bombarded with loads and loads of words, rather you're able to have a sense of what it is that you're being presented with, where it is in the museum, and what it looks like. While these image galleries provide a very welcome, I suppose, texture to the text, an extra dimension, it would have been very interesting to see, I suppose, more of an audio-visual element included. For example, short video clips, maybe even sound files, this sort of thing. This is the sort of thing which has been, for example, done in interactive encyclopedias for decades now. And this could have, I suppose, served this book very well. That said, though, at the price point, I am sure that would have been very difficult to achieve. So I imagine that in producing this book, the author and the publishers have been walking a line between being accessible and affordable, and also being informative and exciting. Now, as far as the intended audience goes, it's actually quite a broad audience, I would say. This book is not, for example, at the coffee table end of things. It's not a lush photographic visual feast, but it's also not, as I say, a dry and rigid textbook. It's somewhere in the middle, and therefore I suspect it'll be a pleasure for people who are looking for a bit of both, in fact. It is an informative and attentive guidebook. Therefore, I'd say this book, and indeed this series of books, is perfect for anyone who's ever wanted to visit the Egyptian Museum, but doesn't want to go, as it were, full expert on the Egyptology, and I count myself in that bracket. It's a very informative and well-balanced text, which doesn't hold your hand, but also doesn't expect you to become a doctor in the field. So it was a real pleasure reading this book and diving into the various elements of the text and the visuals. As I say, it would have been really interesting to see additional audiovisual elements, but it's a fine line to walk, I guess, between cost and accessibility, and as I say, this becoming an overwhelming tome. So I can understand why certain choices are and were made. I look forward to reading future instalments as they are published, and I guess this is the closest that I'm going to get, certainly for some time, to visiting the Egyptian Museum. Certainly being able to go there and have a tour from someone who has been so intimately involved with that institution. So I suppose in summary, get this book if you know someone who's interested. It's a very reasonable price point, $2.99 or £1.99. You can't really go wrong, and it's a good read. And if you want to know a bit more about Egyptology, but as I say, you don't want to necessarily be too overwhelmed with the information, this is a very pleasurable and warm is the word I would use, warm experience. It's a genuine pleasure to have the sense of this walked tour through the museum, and it's that in that sense this has achieved that, I think, really rather well. So I suppose if I gave books scores, which I guess I'll have to from now on, I'd give this book a solid 8 out of 10. As I say, some additional elements could be added in the future, but for now, really, there's no reason not to get hold of it, especially if you're interested in the topic. So there you go, guys. That's my first ever book review, and hopefully you've enjoyed it and found this informative, and maybe you consider going out and getting a bit of a late Christmas present for someone in your family, maybe even for yourself. Once again, thank you so much to Past Preservers for providing this review copy, and I guess all that remains to be said, as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.